Hello, everybody. Welcome to this afternoon's webinar. I'm acutely aware that you've probably already spent most of your day in front of the screen and already on Zoom. So I thank you for taking the time to check in today. I hope that I can offer some insight into our topic and provoke some thought that you can share with your colleagues. I'm based in Melbourne and have just sent my family out to walk the dog again. I think most of you can probably concur with that. So New South Wales and Victorian teachers have endured and continue to be challenged by a very long stretch of remote learning. And this can feel really heavy at times. But today, I've chosen to present this challenge as a positive. So that being said, the pressure, the responsibility that teachers are currently under is enormous. And I conducted this webinar yesterday, and during the Q&A time, we heard teachers share their apathy and their stories of disengagement from their students. I authentically understand this as a teacher and as a mum, and a lot can be said about teachers coming together to feel a little bit stronger in a space where we have a shared understanding. So I totally recognise the mood and the realities of remote teaching at the moment. Feelings of burnout are real and valid, but I come back to trying to see the positives. As educators, we have to use this experience as an opportunity to drive change, to improve learning, and to reflect on new ways that we can support student engagement. And that's where I'd like to take us today. Where's my thing? There we are. So education is what remains after one has forgotten what one has learned at school, by good old Albert Einstein. And I think that's a really good quote to start today off with. So to kick off our discussion, I think it's fair to say that we accept that there is general agreement that schools need to be more than 8R factories. School systems are expected to do more for students than just focus on preparing them for academic tests and improving their scores. So the character-based education movement focuses on building the foundational values that shape the character of our students, rather than merely striving for temporal, performance-driven results. So the development of good character strengths are better predictors of success at uni, but more importantly, in life in general. So schools need to strike a balance, provide an education that stimulates and invigorates students' academic pursuits, while also educating students in pursuits of growing character. Really easy, hey? So I think we'll start with some basic housekeeping. So you can see here, we've turned off the Q&A in the normal Zoom that you'd probably be familiar with, and we're asking for all of our questions to go to Slido. So you just visit that website, and the event code, which is the only thing you need to put in, is Neap 2021. And there's no need to freak out about writing notes. I've got that at the bottom of each of my slides. Your mics have all been turned off. If you're comfortable leaving your camera on, it makes me feel like perhaps we've got a little bit of a usual world where we can see each other's faces. And I know you guys doing all your teaching, it's nice to see some faces. This is being recorded and it will be shared next week. And you'll also receive a PD certificate from attending this webinar. I know the Victorian teachers, your VIT registration is due at the end of the month, and this obviously contributes towards that. So who am I? I suppose is probably a question I should have perhaps started with. My name is Sarah Wilson. I'm an experienced secondary teacher who's taught across a range of educational settings. My most recent teaching role was at the Australian International School in Singapore. And these diverse school settings that I've worked in have given me curriculum and assessment experience within the IB, the VCE, and the Cambridge IGCSE frameworks. My current role, however, is at Neap as Head of Digital Learning Innovation. So in this role, I'm privileged to collaborate with many secondary schools around Victoria, New South Wales, and Queensland, and advise and share knowledge around digital innovations to teaching and learning. So what a year it's been to be in that space. So one of the first things I do when I'm introduced to a school is I naturally visit their website to find out more about their core values and what defining features make them different from all the other schools. So what does their educational community hold dear? A school's vision and mission describes what the school's core purpose is. So this becomes important to me as when schools are considering introducing or improving elements to their digital teaching and learning, it's these statements that need to be considered to see what fits best. So while I was researching for this webinar, I thought it was worth sharing some of these snippets from various Victorian and New South Wales secondary schools. This is parts of their vision and mission statements from a range of schools, private, public, single sex and co-ed. And if we look at some of the keywords that we can read around in the purple blurbs there. So boys with character. I love the foster courage, motivated lifelong learners, global citizens, acquiring knowledge of who they are and how they should live, developing ethical women of action. I particularly like that one. And these ones here. So leave school with the skills, knowledge, and values necessary to be a world-ready woman, where individuals is engaged and empowered to discover purpose and skills for life. So are we motivated yet? Hope so. Some of you don't look so motivated, but that's fair enough. So I think one of the key questions becomes, when we look at all of these blurbs on the screen, and this is what all of the schools try and have in their vision and mission, one common aspirational thread seems to be that the goal of many schools is that they want to create lifelong learners. Well, a question then becomes, what qualities do lifelong learners display? So major changes have taken place in the Australian economy over recent decades with deregulation and the rise of global economic trade and competition. Fast-paced technological change has had a significant impact on the structure of the workforce, altering and in some cases replacing the demand for human labour, affecting blue and white collars alike. It's clear to see that automation and digital disruption will continue to displace workers and create new types of work and occupations at an unprecedented rate. So PwC predicts that 5.1 million Australian jobs, which equates to about 44% of current Australian roles, will disappear in the next 10 years due to digital disruption. So demographers predict that Gen Z, Generation Zoomers, so students born between 97 and 2012, will have 17 different employers over their lifetime. So it's due to these facts and further research that tell us that it will be important for young people to acquire skills that are transferable between jobs, such as problem solving, communication skills, digital literacy, teamwork, presentation skills, and financial literacy. So this is opposed to technical skills, considered to be specific to a particular task, role, or industry. So with so many schools aspiring to educate students to be lifelong learners, as we've seen in the various school values and mission statements, what qualities do lifelong learners display? So do we provide our students with learning opportunities to develop these qualities? So upskilling and lifelong learning need to be the norm because it will be the norm. So do your assessment tasks and teacher feedback reflect this as a teaching priority? And do you yourself as a teacher model lifelong learning to your students? So as we begin our discussion around activating student agency, our critical starting point becomes who owns learning in your classroom? So for today, I've got 4 objectives that hopefully we'll go through rather seamlessly, let's hope. So we're going to discuss the importance of why digital natives require the explicit teaching of metacognition skills as part of our teaching practice. We're going to describe the benefits of shifting traditional views of a teacher to facilitator and share some understandings about the need to prioritise depth of learning over breadth of learning, while we try and gain some insight into how teachers can activate student agency while we continue to teach remotely. So many school systems are considering how to best future-proof this generation in light of profound predicted societal changes. A number of public commentators are calling for our education system to respond to the growing demand of 21st century skills as a national economic imperative. So this skill set is flagged as being critical for the digital and evolving economy in which we want our students to play an active and a successful role in. So instead of subject-specific knowledge, 21st century skills are ways of thinking, ways of working, and ways of living. So as I mentioned before, the Gen Z, the Zoomers, who can also be described as being digital natives in comparison to perhaps you or I, who are digital immigrants. In many parts of the world, teenagers have grown up with computers, multimedia, and phone technology, whereas we have had to learn to adopt these technologies. Like previous generations before, perhaps the baby boomers, generational factors and trends, strengths and weaknesses need to be reflected in our education pedagogy and curriculum. So some of these societal trends and generational demographics can offer pedagogical guidance. So rather than feeling despair at educating for the unknown, I prefer to perceive it as an alluring and an inspiring agenda. Educating for the unknown favours a vision of learning that fosters curiosity, enlightenment and empowerment for a complex and dynamic world. And if we've learned anything over the last 18 months and 2 years, life can be unpredictable and the world has changed irrevocably. So discussions around what key skills students need for the future workforce are valuable and, in my opinion, at a critical point. When it comes to preparing students for unknown careers, a combination of skills and character qualities are essential. So the ability to adapt to change will be important for future-proofing school leavers. And some have said, well, it has been said, one could say, we currently have 20th century teachers teaching a 19th century curriculum to 21st century students. So what is student agency? Is it just another buzzword in education? Well, in short, it refers to the level of autonomy and power that a student experiences in the learning environment. Agency gives students the power to direct and take responsibility for their learning, creating independent and self-regulated learners. It's about acting rather than being acted upon, shaping rather than being shaped, and making responsible decisions and choices rather than accepting those determined by others, by us as teachers. So when students are agents in their learning, they play an active role. They're not passive learners. And research consistently tells us that active learning increases student engagement and achieves a deeper level of understanding. So when students are active agents in their learning, they are also learning how to learn. And ultimately, we want our students to learn how to think, not what to think, don't we? So we know that one size doesn't fit all with teaching, and choice gives voice. So this empowers students with agency. Student agency doesn't mean students can voice whatever they want or they can choose whatever they wish to learn. They need the support and guidance from teachers in order to exercise their agency and, most importantly, realise their potential. So the objectives today and the importance of student agency are reflected in various educational documents. So the HITS document, the High Impact Teaching Strategies, which you'd all probably be aware of, the 10 instructional practices that research and evidence have consistently shown that when they're applied, they directly increase student learning. So one of these instructional practices includes the importance of explicitly teaching metacognition strategies. So teaching students to think about their own thinking. Implementing the explicit teaching of metacognition strategies also appears in our professional teaching practice principles. And if student agency is an area that interests you, you'd be aware of the amplified document from the Victorian perspective, which also complements the FISO framework for improving student outcomes. And these same priorities are mentioned and emphasised in various New South Wales government documents. Now, don't freak out. I'm not going to go all over educational documents, but I think it is important to see where we sit. So the last thing I want to do is bore you with educational speak and acronyms and policy, but to the point to take away is that repeated research and evidence on best practice tells us that ultimately the explicit teaching of metacognition skills achieves the goal of empowering students and activates student agency. And it's these qualities that create lifelong learners. I think this diagram here from the amplified document summarises why activating student agency is so important. So students who have a strong sense of agency work harder, they're more engaged, they're more resilient, better at planning, they choose more challenging tasks, set goals, and have improved concentration. So clearly, they're all qualities that place students in good stead for the future, and clearly all qualities that we desire for lifelong learners. So you can tell my background as an English and a psychology teacher, but there's another quote that I really like. And I think the part about it is that we're not to dominate the students, we're to set them free. And I think this brings me to John Hattie. So Hattie's groundbreaking book, Visible Learning, synthesized the results of more than 15 years of evidence-based research, which involved millions of students, into what actually works in schools to improve learning. And one area of his research documents the dominance of teacher voices in the classroom. Hattie's study on the topic found that teachers talk for 70 to 80% of class time on average. And his own further research on this topic produced an even higher average of 89%. So Hattie's findings from this and further research is summarised into 7 practical strategies that directly make a positive impact to student learning, and much of what's included in the HITS document. So to cut to the chase, the point and the strategy that Hattie makes that's most relevant for today is that teachers should not be afraid to be the sage on the stage. So using the I do, we do, you do model. So Hattie encourages the teacher to step away from the front of the stage of the learning, releasing the responsibility of learning to the students. If we continue with our traditional methods of teaching, like dominating our classrooms and teaching space, we're doing a disservice to our students. We want our students to be future-proofed for our unpredictable world. Therefore, as teachers, we must include opportunities for students to develop their agency as part of our practice. 2 years ago, probably like yourselves, I started reading a few articles that proposed and discussed a notion of like blended hybrid teaching philosophy. And I was naive, or perhaps hopeful, that I thought that this would not be the case. And surely this pandemic would blow over, right? So I thought that this pivoting between remote and face-to-face teaching was just a stage. Always an optimist, but clearly I was wrong. So teaching has irrevocably changed forever now. Students have also changed. Their needs, their learning styles, and the requirements that they need to be their best in the future has also changed. What we teach our students may well become secondary over how we teach them to think. So sure, the value of understanding content knowledge, perhaps, for example, the Russian Revolution, certainly has undeniable value. However, perhaps it's the learnings of how the student searches for facts for knowledge, keyword searches, checking reputable sources, how they synthesize and decipher fact from fiction, or how they participate when collaborating and communicating with their peers online. Or maybe it's the planning they undertook when they had to respectfully respond from different political perspectives. Or maybe it was even the students' reflections and links with propaganda posters from the revolution in comparison to the propaganda posters of anti-vax sentiments from modern day COVID. So maybe it's actually these learnings that have greater value than the factual knowledge of events of the Russian Revolution. After all, there is Google. So my first point when we're discussing positive ways that we can activate student agency while we teach remotely is the first thing that we can do is change the notion of teacher to facilitator. So when I say the word facilitator, perhaps words like planner or coordinator or designer come to mind. And all of these words lead us to think of facilitator as someone who sets up, designs and oversees the environment that's conducive to the goal, but they're not the center of the scene. Now, when we say the word teacher, perhaps we get words like coach, instructor, or lecturer. Now, all of these associations make the word teacher feel like the central part of the environment and the goal. So in a classroom with traditional teacher, the student relies on the educator to feed them the proper instruction and training. In a classroom with a facilitator, they set up the learning environment and largely give the students the ability to learn on their own. Facilitators are more often used in adult education settings where it's thought that adults can handle independent learning more readily. But is this really true? What do our experiences with remote teaching show us? Think about where we find ourselves today. Remote learning finds us as the facilitators. The shift has already occurred. Teachers need to be models of lifelong learning more than dispensers of knowledge. So Google has changed everything, literally. Our students are digital natives, so the way we teach them should be different to the way we were taught. Access to information is not the problem. However, students need to be coached on how to cultivate critical thinking. Googling is easier than thinking. We need to get students to create responses, not to find them. Sometimes it's hard to let go of this control and ask yourself the question, are you facilitating or teaching? And have you got the balance right? The second key point to our goal when we're looking at activating student agency is that we need our students to learn how to learn. Students who aren't given the opportunity for independent learning don't acquire the skill of how to learn and how to examine a principle from multiple angles. The teacher stands in the way of the student's natural curiosity. Learning is about how to think rather than what to think. And simply imparting information not only fails to engage the students, but it also leaves them unprepared to navigate a world in which problems don't have nice, neat solutions, because we know life just doesn't roll like that. So rather than giving students information, educators need to give students tools to think critically and to solve problems on their own. And this is why the explicit teaching of metacognition strategies is so important. Here it becomes important to clarify what is included when we discuss the importance of explicitly teaching metacognition strategies. So in this chart, I've listed some examples of what is meant in terms of what we need to explicitly teach, and as well as how this can be achieved through activity examples. So when we're doing our lesson and our unit planning, we check to see that we've included various learning styles, we have options for differentiation. However, another point to add to our mental checklist is regular attention to this set of skills and strategies. These metacognition strategies can't be assumed. They need to be explicitly taught, modelled, and specifically included in your assessment. And this is what the education documents and research about what constitutes best practice continually state. Interestingly, while I was preparing for this webinar, I remembered when I was in a local Chinese school overseas, there was a poster encouraging Year 9 students to be independent learners. And I noticed the poster because the term independent learner was translated differently from my own understanding. The poster described independent learning as learning on your own and not distracting or talking to others around you. So there are some cultural elements to consider when we allow and encourage our students to work independently. But also, there's also some cultural differences. We also have our parent community that may also hold different beliefs about how their children should be encouraged to work independently. In some cases, some parents believe that if their child is not given the answer, we are not doing our job. So when our goal is to activate student agency remotely, we've discussed the fact of the importance of changing our notion of teacher to facilitator, and that our delivery and teaching pedagogy need to reflect this. We've also discussed the importance of the need to include explicit teaching of metacognition strategies into our lessons to teach our students how to learn. Which brings me to my third point, which is made by Professor Jeff Masters, AO, Chief Executive Officer of ASA, Australian Council for Educational Research. So Jeff states that as educators, we need to focus and prioritise depth of learning over the breadth of learning. So you would have heard the expression, our school curriculum, it's often being described as being overcrowded. It has great breadth. So Masters states that the goal of modern education should be to develop deep student understanding of key concepts and principles and the ability to apply these understandings to unfamiliar contexts. So although mastery of factual procedural knowledge is important and essential, it needs to be organised around big ideas. So like through investigative or inquiry projects, application of learning tasks. And this is modelled with the recent priorities in the push for STEM. The important point to make here is that if we prioritise depth of learning over breadth of learning, those students who succeed in our subject are also likely to succeed in others. And that's not because of the curriculum we teach, it's because of the way we teach it. So ultimately, we're not naive here. We are faced with some challenges having these great ideas. And one of them would be that our VCE and HSC curriculum is based on a linear perspective. So most Australian schools are under regulations of the year 11 and 12 certificate requirements. So around year 10, students start to work in preparation for the hard work. This influence isn't entirely bad, but in many cases, some say it encourages a more superficial approach to learning. So students will, what can I do well in? How much do I have to know? Rather than what do I need to learn? Or more importantly, what would I like to learn? Another challenge could be that autonomy can just be really worrying for some students and parents. It's another challenge to activating student agency. Some students find autonomy worrying. We all know these students. This can be for many reasons. They could get things wrong, misunderstand the instructions, or fail to meet teacher expectations. Some people just prefer everything to be spelled out neatly and clearly and precisely. But life is rarely a simple choice between total success and total disaster. And remember that our goal is to develop lifelong learners. So yes, we know that students get some things wrong and make mistakes. However, they will learn from the experience. Reassurance, coaching, leading, scaffolding are all important traits for teachers to demonstrate when leading students to autonomy. So to summarise some tools for activating student agency remotely, the modern teacher's role has already changed from teacher to facilitator. Remote teaching enables us to embrace this shift more easily. This is a positive change for secondary teachers as it prepares and helps future-proof students. We have to try to focus on the positives of remote teaching. And one of them is that it allows us as facilitators to explicitly teach metacognition skills more easily than if we were in the face-to-face classroom environment. There are more opportunities that we can provide students with to practice metacognition skills remotely. As the difficult reality is, students have to work much more independently at home than in our classroom. Essentially, they're forced to be independent, but rather than focus on the negatives associated with this, we need to drive it towards a positive outcome, and that this independence can drive student agency. So while we continue to teach remotely, we must remain conscious of Google-proofing our lessons. And in order to do this, we need to facilitate our learning tasks to go deep. And again, as we continue to push to focus on the positive aspects of remote teaching, going deep over going wide is easier online than in the classroom. Now, it would be remiss of me if I didn't mention Neap's digital offering, as it provides digital tests for digital natives. So this digital platform offers VCE and HSE revision tests for teachers that are auto-marked and collated into various data points. So students are delivered immediate feedback on their performance, where they can instigate opportunities like set goals, operate on digital feedback, and seek further resources to actively follow up. This promotes their agency as they continue to independently revise productively. So this may be appropriate for some of your teaching backgrounds, and as senior teachers are collectively struggling to prepare our VCE and HSC students for these unpredictable end-of-year exams, this may be something that you're interested in. And if this works for you, I encourage you to reach out to Andrew there and to find out more, or visit our website. I think at this point I will have a sip of water, and I'm going to go to Slido, and hopefully there will be a question there that maybe somebody has contributed, and we'll see what it brings. I'll just have a sip. Okay, thank you to the first person. Lucky first cab off the rank. How do we navigate explicitly teaching metacognition strategies when students are not experiencing that in other classrooms? Is one teacher enough? Well, I suppose I can only go by opinion on this one here. I think any teacher who explicitly teaches metacognition strategies is doing the right thing. It's preparing your student to be a lifelong learner. It's also preparing your student with skills that they're going to need for their higher years of education, and obviously as they move forward throughout their path, wherever that teaches them. So even if it is just yourself, hopefully the webinars kind of flicked a switch in your head where maybe you're going to try a few new things. And as we look at remote learning, this is a great opportunity to perhaps try something new and invigorate the students with a new set of skills and strategies. So if it is only you, so be it. But maybe you can also talk to your other colleagues as well, and perhaps put it as a department level, or maybe even a subject. Obviously, with an English background, there's lots of scope there to do that. Now, what have we got here? All right. Can you give some examples of strategies for Google proofing? Well, some examples and strategies for Google proofing. Now, it's not always easy. And look, every lesson is not amazing. We all know that. But if we can come up with one good lesson a week at this stage, we're doing pretty well. So Google proofing, we're talking about application or inquiry. So this investigative kind of thing. So not where they can just find answers. So things like I sort of mentioned, I suppose, with my example of the Russian Revolution. So that example of the propaganda posters, so that they had historically, but now we compare it and make links to modern day links. So those kind of activities where they're making associations to prior knowledge and new knowledge, those kind of application tasks are examples of Google proofing, where they can't type in Russian Revolution propaganda versus COVID. So they're going to have to actually think and use their own thinking to come up with their answers. Now, like I said, that's not the whole class by any means, but if you can slip these tasks and opportunities in throughout your lessons, I think that's a real benefit to everybody. Yourself, you can come up and read their answers, see what they can actually come up with, their curiosity, but also for the students, they might tap into things that they didn't even know. Thank you for that one. The one up here, so can you provide some specific examples of how to integrate metacognition, sorry, I've said it too many times today, metacognitive strategies in a remote setting? So let me just, so I'm clear. How to integrate metacognitive strategies in a remote setting. All right, so metacognitive strategies can be just goal setting. Because I'm flying on the top of my feet here, let's stick with goal setting. So in a remote setting, you can clearly set a task as you normally would with your introduction. Then perhaps they can go in their breakout rooms and prepare a plan for how to get the essay done, for how to read the report on the science project and what points they need to do from there. A simple thing like writing out dot points, prioritizing them, and goal setting is a really simple way to start off a task, and it gets them to think about their thinking. They're thinking about their planning, and they're developing a plan to move forward and to activate. So when they plan to activate, the other side of the coin is at the end of the lesson, you get them to reflect and ask them, did they operate on that plan that they set? Did it work? What didn't work? What should they have put in? So probably all those questions that you would normally ask, but perhaps they're just more explicit. And that's the whole key point of what I'm trying to talk about. If we explicitly teach the students the skills and draw their attention to them, they're then aware of how to implement them across other subjects. I hope I've answered that okay. Maybe one more. Here we go. How do you encourage student agency when students are reluctant to learn independently and or seem not to have a desire to take responsibility for learning? And HS, I'm thinking that's high school, which that's my area. So I totally get that. There are some students that will constantly ask you questions. Is this right? Is this right? What do I do next? And we all know those kids. They do drive us a little bit bonkers, but it is, like I said, about scaffolding and coaching them and leading them to that. You can't just set a task and say, go and work on your own. But when I was preparing for this webinar, I did read a really cool activity, which perhaps now is a good opportunity to share, that this was a teacher who had a red cup, yellow cup, and green cup. And don't take that literal as such, but at the front of their screens when kids were working on a task, and the students would start with green, they're fine, they can work by themselves. Yellow means there's something they're not sure of, but they're working it out and pondering it at the moment. And red means I need your help. So the student is then forced to think about their thinking, think about where they sit on this scale of independence, and they're reflecting it with the color choices in front of them. So that could even just be a sticky note, or it doesn't have to be a cup, but that was just what I'd read. And I thought that was a really good way of incrementally increasing that independence for students. And some kids won't bother you for the whole lesson, but there will be those students who are reluctant to be independent and reluctant to take responsibility for their learning. But I think that activity really shows that we're coaching them. That's the end goal for them, to work independently. We don't start off like that. So I thought that activity was good in terms of encouraging students. Oh, there's lots more. I didn't scroll down. I am conscious of time, and you have been online, so maybe I'll just, one more maybe. Is student agency a natural skill that exists, then schools stamp it out of students, like creativity? Oh, what a realist. I'd like to think student agency, oh, it's gone. Hang on. I'd like to think that student agency, we all have that drive. We all have that drive to be empowered. And I think if we're not aware of it, that's what we need to encourage and show the students potential to be empowered. And I think if students are empowered and autonomous, then they will be creative, because they have that empowerment to be able to try new things and to think diversely. So I think every student has that potential. It's our job to awaken it, and it's our job to empower the student to believe that they have it. Perhaps that's a little bit naive, but I think that's sort of the right answer. And as we all, look, I'm not naive enough to think that you've all been sitting in classes today and your classes have probably been totally silent. And most of the kids probably even haven't had their cameras on. And it's very easy for me to sit here tonight and say, these are all these strategies and tools. But I think it gets back to the point that we have to think of the positives. Okay, we have to think of ways that remote teaching, remote learning can be used to really enhance our students' learning. And that's what this is about. There sure are some major challenges and it doesn't always work. But I think if we can focus on some elements that we can tweak to promote student agency and to empower students, I think that's a really good thing. I think perhaps on that note, I might leave it for that. Whoops, hang on, I don't want that. Wrong button. Whoops, we want this one. There we are. Whoops, which I think from what I had just said before is really great. I think the whole point of today is to acknowledge that remote teaching is difficult. It does have challenges, but we need to focus on the positives. And we need to project that into ways that we can support student engagement, empowerment, and well-being. And let's be honest, I don't need to explain why that's so pivotal at the moment. So I'll leave you with the question, are you providing enough opportunities in your remote classes for students to be active agents in their learning? And I hope that this has perhaps provoked a little bit of thought in what is a very challenging time. So I would really like to thank you for coming, and no doubt there will be some an email with the recording and the slides for your own benefit later. So I truly thank you for coming and sharing and listening for the last 45 minutes. I think you all probably deserve to put your slippers on and have a glass of wine now. So thank you and good luck.